The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee, the kind that clings to every military hospital long after midnight. Jack Monroe's mop moved in slow, steady circles, the sound of bristles on tile barely louder than the hum of machines behind the glass. The doctors nearby spoke in low voices, sharp suits, tired eyes, the kind that stopped believing years ago. 22 doctors, same verdict, one nurse murmured without looking up. "She's gone, Monroe." Another doctor chuckled under his breath. "Even miracles know when to quit." Jack didn't answer. He just glanced at the nameplate glowing blue against the glass. General Evelyn Carter, status, brain dead. Her ribbons were lined in perfect order across her chest, even now. He'd seen that kind of order before. Men and women who'd faced the impossible and refused to flinch. He moved closer to the window, staring at her face, still and pale. Then something, faint, almost lost in the hum, reached him. A soft vibration, a whisper of a breath. Maybe even a melody. He froze. The nurse rolled her eyes. "You're hearing ghosts, Janitor?" Jack's voice was barely a whisper. "No, I'm hearing life." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Jack Monroe wasn't the kind of man anyone noticed. He moved through the sterile hallways like a shadow, quiet, steady, and unseen. Most knew him as the night janitor, the guy who fixed the squeaky cartwheels himself and never complained about double shifts. But there was more behind his calm eyes, a story only the few who looked closer could guess. He was in his early 40s, hair trimmed short out of habit, posture too straight for someone who spent nights pushing a mop. Years ago, he'd worn a different uniform. U.S. Army Special Forces. Combat medic. The kind who stitched men back together in the dust of Kandahar and carried more ghosts home than medals. Now his battles were smaller, a quiet apartment, a coffee thermos with his daughter's stickers on it, and a job that kept him close enough to the base hospital to feel useful, even if no one remembered his name. Jack worked the night shift at Port Haven Military Medical Center so he could pick up Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, from school every morning before she went to her mother's. The routine kept him grounded. The hospital floors gleamed because he made them gleam, but in truth, the shine helped him think. Every night, he carried a small music box in his pocket, a dented, silver-painted one with faded stars carved into the lid. Lily had given it to him for Father's Day. When it opened, it played, "You Are My Sunshine," slow and tinny, but somehow warm. Sometimes, when the corridors emptied and the hum of ventilators filled the silence, he'd wind it just once, close his eyes, and hum along. It steadied his hands. Most people passed him without seeing him. Dr. Thomas Avery, the hospital's chief neurologist, made sure of that. Arrogant, sharp-tongued, and impatient, Avery barely looked at the janitorial staff. "Keep the floor shiny, Monroe," he said one evening, brushing by. "That's your expertise." Jack only nodded, no anger, no sarcasm. "Yes, sir, always." He'd learned long ago that pride didn't keep you alive, discipline did. But not everyone dismissed him. Sarah Blake, a military attorney stationed in the legal wing, recognized him one night as he polished the marble near her office. She paused, frowning. "Jack Monroe?" she asked softly. "You probably don't remember me. I handled your custody hearing years ago." He gave a small nod. "Sarah Blake. Yeah, I remember." Her eyes softened. "How's Lily?" Jack smiled faintly. "Growing. Smarter than me already. You doing okay?" "I'm fine," he said, shoulders straight. "Some battles you fight from the sidelines, that's all." She hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, but he was already turning back to his mop. The conversation folded away like a letter he couldn't afford to read again. Jack's ex-wife, Anna, still lived across town. She was kind but cautious, protective of Lily in ways that came from fear more than anger. She'd seen the tremors in Jack's hands when thunder hit too close, or the way his jaw locked during fireworks. She called it PTSD. He called it remembering. He didn't blame her. War changes how you hear the world. Sometimes, the silence was louder than gunfire. That night, as the last nurses clocked out and the lights dimmed to their night setting, Jack pushed his cart past the ICU. Most rooms were dark except for the blinking of machines. Then he noticed one that wasn't. Room 407. He'd passed it 100 times before, but the brass nameplate always caught his eye. General Evelyn Carter, Air Force, 4-star. Her photo hung on the wall beside the door, eyes steady, jaw set, uniform crisp. The kind of leader men followed without question. The kind who didn't just serve, she commanded history. He'd read the headline months ago, 4-star general critically injured in helicopter crash, investigation pending. Some said it was pilot error. Others whispered sabotage. Either way, she'd never woken up. Jack stopped his cart, staring through the glass. Tubes ran from her body like tangled threads. The machines breathed for her, beeped for her, lived for her, lived for her. The plaque beneath her photo read, "Valor beyond measure." He whispered the words under his breath. Beyond measure, something about her face, even motionless, carried strength. Not defiance, just endurance. He'd seen that same stillness in soldiers who refused to die even when everyone else gave up. He glanced around. No one was near. The corridor was empty except for the hum of air vents and the slow pulse of monitors. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Lily's music box. He wound it once. The soft tune filled the quiet hallway, fragile, almost out of place among the steady beeps. Jack leaned against the wall, eyes on the glass. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," he hummed softly, his voice just a whisper. Then it happened. A flicker. Not the light, not the machines. Her finger. A twitch so small it might have been imagination. He froze, watching her hand. Nothing. Then again, a faint movement, like the muscles were trying to remember. Jack stepped closer, heart thudding. "General Carter," he whispered, voice trembling. "If you can hear me, just blink." Nothing. He waited. 10 seconds. 15. Then her eyelid fluttered. Once. He stood there, barely breathing. His hand tightened around the music box until the song wound down to silence. The corridor stayed still, machines steady. But he knew what he saw. A movement. A spark. The kind of miracle no chart could measure. Jack whispered into the quiet, his voice steady now. "You're not gone, ma'am. Not yet." He set the mop aside, gaze fixed on the window, and for the first time in years, something inside him, something he thought had died in a desert halfway across the world, came alive again. The morning came in gray and flat, the kind of light that makes hospitals feel endless. Jack clocked in early, still carrying the sound of the lullaby in his head. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the neurology wing and waited outside Dr. Chide. Thomas Avery's office until the man finally looked up. "I need 2 minutes," Jack said quietly. Avery didn't bother hiding his irritation. "About what?" "Room 407. General Carter." Jack kept his voice calm. "I saw a twitch." Twice. Eyelid flutter and finger movement when music played. Avery leaned back in his chair, lips thin. "You're a janitor, not a neurologist." "I was a medic in Kandahar," Jack replied. "I know when someone's fighting to stay." The pause that followed wasn't respect. It was annoyance. Avery stood and straightened his lab coat as if the conversation had already ended. "Keep the floors shiny, Monroe. Let the doctors handle the medicine." Jack watched him walk away down the hall, the man's shoes clicking against the tile. Laughter followed, not Avery's, but a pair of residents passing by, shaking their heads as if they'd just overheard a ridiculous rumor. "Poor guy's delusional," one of them whispered. The other snorted. "Next he'll say he cured brain death with a lullaby." Jack turned back to his cart. He didn't argue. There were 1,000 fights he'd learned not to start. This wasn't one of them. Not yet. Outside the ICU, a security sergeant flagged him down. "Hey, Monroe." "Quick word." Jack stopped, hands on the cart's handle. Got a note from admin. Stay out of restricted zones unless you're scheduled for cleaning. ICU is sensitive. Cameras picked up you lingering last night. I was cleaning, Jack said, not saying you weren't. The sergeant lowered his voice. Just don't give them a reason, okay? They're jumpy whenever rank is involved. Jack nodded once. Understood. He pushed the cart onward, moving the way he always did, quiet, efficient, invisible. But the hum in his chest wouldn't settle. He'd seen that eyelid move, twice. He'd heard the breath move with the music. He could still feel his own heartbeat sinking to it, the old field rhythm of waiting for a pulse under dust and pressure and prayer. He made it through the shift like a ghost. When the day finally darkened and the hospital softened into its night voice, he made a decision. He wasn't going to break rules. He was going to be sure. He waited until the corridor thinned to one nurse at the end station and the soft glow of screensavers through glass. Room 407 lay quiet. Jack stood outside the doorway just as he had before. He reached into his pocket and took out the dented music box. He wound it once. The melody drifted into the corridor, thin and warm, a toy soldier of a song stepping across a battlefield of machines. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Jack's eyes moved to the monitor. Numbers held steady. Then a small spike. Another. He looked at General Carter's face and saw it, the faintest flutter, an eyelid rising just enough to catch light, falling back like a wave against shore. A breath followed that wasn't machine-timed. It rose when the note rose. It softened when the tune softened. A whisper traveled the gap between glass and air. It wasn't a word. It was the shape of one. A sound starting deep and trying to make a road back to daylight. Jack didn't speak. He lifted his phone, the old one with the cracked corner, and started recording. He caught the monitor. He caught the music. He caught the flutter. He kept the camera steady when her lips pressed faintly together as if to chase the next note. The song ended. He stopped recording. He stood in the lull and let the silence test him. Then he wound the box again and repeated the process. Same rise. Same breath. Another flutter. He exhaled. His hands shook and then went still. He saved the video and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Back in a storage alcove 2 hallways over, he sent the clip to Sarah Blake. He didn't add a speech. He added 5 words. Tell me I'm not crazy. The reply came faster than he expected. Where are you? I'm coming now. She arrived in 10 minutes, hair pulled back, blazer over scrubs she must have thrown on to blend in. They stood together at the glass, the music box in Jack's palm. Ready? He asked. Ready, she said. He wound the box. The melody moved, and with it, the sane cascade. The monitor climbed a hair. The eyelid lifted like a soldier obeying a command. A breath traveled up and nearly formed into a word. Sarah covered her mouth. Jack, that's a voluntary reflex. She's responding. That's not random. She's in there, Jack said. His voice wasn't triumphant. It was steady, the way a medic's voice gets when there's something worth holding on to. They shut the box. They shut the moment. Sarah stepped back and looked down the hall. We need to file an immediate petition. Re-evaluation under the Federal Military Patient Rights Act. I'll write it. You'll sign a statement. Jack nodded. We do it right. They found an empty office and worked by the light of a screen. Sarah typed, called 2 late-night nurses who owed her favors, and pulled up a form most people never used. Jack signed where she pointed and added a note in his neat block letters. Auditory stimulus elicits repeatable response. Recommends supervised testing. When they walked the petition to the admin desk, the night supervisor's eyes flicked from the paper to Jack and back again. You're kidding me, she said under her breath. You're filing this based on a janitor's. She stopped herself. On Mr. Monroe's observation, Sarah's tone didn't waver. Undocumented responses captured on video. The law allows it. File it. 10 minutes later, Dr. Avery appeared as if he'd been waiting in the walls for the opportunity. He didn't greet either of them. He looked at the petition, looked at Jack, and then addressed the room. "This is a waste of time," his mouth thinned, "and it's insubordination, Ms. Blake. Encouraging non-clinical staff to meddle in critical care constitutes a breach of protocol." "Protocol didn't keep her from breathing when a toy box played," Sarah shot back. "A monitored reevaluation won't kill anyone. If she's non-responsive, you'll have your proof." "If she isn't," Avery snapped. "Security." Two officers stepped out of the elevator alcove. Not angry. Not urgent. Just present. The older one cleared his throat. "Doctor." "Avery, do you need us to escort Mr. Monroe off the ICU floor and restrict him to assigned zones?" Avery said. "Effective immediately." Jack didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at Sarah and said, "You'll get the hearing?" "I'll get the hearing," she promised. "By noon." Avery smirked. "By noon, I'll have a disciplinary write-up, and you'll have a judge who laughs you out of." Sarah didn't blink. "Then we'll see who's laughing." The officers walked with Jack down the hall. No one touched him. No one needed to. He moved under his own power, same as always, eyes forward, the music box, a small weight in his pocket. Frank Miller, his supervisor, caught up with him by the custodial supply room. Frank's gray mustache bent with worry. "Jack," he said softly, "they're looking to suspend you." "You know that, right?" "I know," Jack said. "Please, son." Frank lowered his voice. "You've done good here. Don't let pride take your paycheck." Jack met the older man's eyes. "It isn't pride, it's a pulse. I've buried too many who never got a chance. I won't bury her too." Frank held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll do what I can. Stay in your lanes till this shakes out." Jack finished his shift in silence. Every sweep of the mop felt like measuring distance from the man he'd been to the man he refused to stop being. When dawn crawled across the windows, he clocked out, drove home, and watched the video again. He watched it twice more, listening for anything that might betray him. He heard only the same truth. "By 8, Sarah called. "We've got a preliminary meeting," she said. "Not the full ethics board yet, but a judge will see the petition. Bring the video. Bring the box. Don't say a word unless you have to." Jack arrived in his cleanest shirt, hair damp from a sink, not a shower. He sat beside Sarah at a long table while Dr. Avery controlled his posture like a man preparing for a portrait. The judge dialed in by video. "Ms. Blake," she began, "you understand the extraordinary nature of what you're requesting." "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said. "We're asking for a supervised auditory stimulus test in the presence of qualified staff. No invasive procedures. Simply a controlled environment to confirm or disprove a repeated, documented response." Avery folded his hands. "Your Honor, this is theater. We have 22 independent assessments confirming brain death. This court cannot allow." The judge cut him off with a raised palm. "Mr. Monroe." Jack straightened. "Yes, ma'am. You are not a clinician." "No, ma'am. You are a former combat medic." "Yes, ma'am. In your experience," the judge said, "have you ever seen auditory stimuli precipitate observable, repeatable responses in patients labeled non-responsive?" "Yes," Jack answered. "Sometimes the body stops talking the way we expect, but it's still listening. In the field, we learn to listen back. Rhythm, breath, a blink that matches sound." The judge looked down, then up again. "Dr. Kaur." "Avery, if the test is strictly observational, what harm is there?" Avery's jaw tightened. "Precedent, Your Honor. We are not a war zone. We cannot base care on superstition and sentiment." "Then it should be easy to disprove," the judge replied. "Ms. Blake, you'll have 30 minutes this afternoon. I want a report filed by end of day. If the result is inconclusive, this ends." Sarah nodded once. "Thank you, Your Honor." The call ended. Avery stood, mask slipping just enough to show temper. "You just politicized my ICU," he spat. "If this stirs up media, I will hold you both responsible." Sarah gathered her files. Hold the evidence responsible, doctor. If there's none, you win. If there is, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The test was set for 4 p.m. Jack spent the hours in between cleaning low-traffic corridors and avoiding the ICU like it had grown teeth. He kept his hands busy. He kept his mind even. When the clock slid past 3:30, he washed the music box with an antiseptic wipe and waited outside room 407 with his badge visible and his shoulders level. The room filled with people who didn't usually meet in the same air. 2 neurologists, a respiratory therapist, a hospital attorney, a colonel from logistics who seemed to have wandered in because he'd heard the word general, Dr. Tomer. Avery stood at the foot of the bed as if guarding it from bad ideas. Sarah stood by the glass. "Begin when ready," she said, voice steady. Jack didn't address the room. He addressed the woman in the bed. "Ma'am," he said softly, "it's Jack." He wound the box. The first note spun into the sterile air, hesitant and stubborn, a little engine pulling hope behind it. The monitor didn't jump because someone wanted it to. It moved because something in her did. A small rise. A breath that didn't match the ventilator's metronome. Her eyelid lifted. It stayed a hair longer than before. Her lips tried to form a shape and almost found it. The respiratory therapist whispered, "Hold on." Avery's pen tapped once against his clipboard. "Artifacts," he muttered. "Acoustic vibration." "Again," Sarah said. Jack played it once more. The same sequence. Rise. Flutter. Breath reaching for sound. The therapist leaned in. "That's not artifact." One of the neurologists cleared his throat. "You're seeing what you want to see." "Then stop wanting it and look anyway," Sarah said. Avery stepped forward. "Enough." Jack stopped the music. The room breathed. He set the box on the bedside tray, palms open, empty. He didn't push. He didn't argue. He'd learned that certainty grows quieter the truer it gets. The second neurologist, older and less eager to speak, scribbled a note and said, "Recommend a follow-up test under different stimuli." Avery bristled. "No!" Sarah's eyes flared. "Doctor." "Fine," Avery snapped. "One more. Then this circus ends." They turned off the overhead lights to minimize glare. The ventilator's whisper seemed louder in the dim. Jack returned to the tray and wound the box only halfway, letting the tempo slow and wobble. The way Lily liked it when she was falling asleep. The tune faltered and found itself and faltered again. The moment it did, General Carter's finger curled, not fully, but enough for skin to crease against sheet. The respiratory therapist gasped. The older neurologist whispered, "Voluntary." The other one swallowed hard and said nothing. Avery didn't blink. Sarah exhaled. "We have our reevaluation," she said. "Full ethics board, today." Avery spoke without looking at anyone. "We'll see." They filed out in a hush that didn't belong to defeat or victory. It belonged to the first second after a door opens onto something new. In the hallway, the whispers started. Nurses who'd once shaken their heads now glanced at Jack with a kind of careful respect, the way you look at someone who might have just told a truth too large to hold. A resident muttered, "Did you see her hand?" "Probably just reflex," another shot back, though his voice had softened. The security sergeant from earlier walked past Jack and gave a small nod. "You keeping your lanes?" Jack nodded back. "Yes, Sergeant." "Good," the sergeant said. "For what it's worth, I hope you're right." Frank found him by the vending machines and pressed a coffee into his hand. "They still might try to hang this on you," he warned. "Suspension, notation in your file. They don't like being wrong." Jack took the coffee and didn't drink it. "I've buried too many who never got a chance," he said. "I won't bury her too." Frank sighed and clapped his shoulder. "Then stand your ground." By the time the email came in announcing the emergency ethics session, the hospital was breathing like it had just finished a run. Jack didn't see the message. He wasn't on that list. Sarah reached him by phone instead. "Conference room C," she said. 15 minutes. You'll be called to testify about what you saw. Keep it simple. No heroics." "I don't do heroics," Jack said. "I mop floors." She paused, then laughed softly, the first sound of relief all day. "You do more than that. But today, just tell the truth." He closed the call and stood alone for a moment. He could feel the old field stillness settling in, the way time slows when choice becomes duty. He checked the music box, half expecting the hinge to fail or the spring to jam. It didn't. The tiny mechanism was as stubborn as the song it carried. On his way down the hall, a nurse who'd mocked him the week before stepped aside to let him pass. She didn't meet his eyes. She just whispered, "Good luck," and kept moving. Jack didn't smile. He didn't need to. He walked toward the room where people with power would decide whether to keep listening. He had nothing to sell them, only a simple question asked by a simple tune: what if hope still lives where you say it doesn't? Audience, what would you have done if you were there? Would you risk your job for the truth? Would you play a song and trust a breath to answer? The file room sat 2 floors below the ICU, a concrete bunker of steel cabinets and stale paper. Jack signed the log without a word and took a seat at a narrow table beneath a flickering bulb. The folder for General Evelyn Carter was thicker than his fist, the kind of file where truth could hide in the margins. He opened it carefully, the pages whispering like leaves. The preliminary crash report came first. Mechanical failure at altitude. Loss of rotor integrity. Controlled descent, compromised by wind shear. He traced the lines with a calloused finger, feeling the sentences try to close a door. But tucked behind the official form was an addendum he almost missed. A notation from a staff judge advocate about pending procurement irregularities. He went back to the dates. Carter's helicopter went down 3 days after she requested sealed records from a defense contractor with a history of cost overruns. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. In Afghanistan, you learn to smell when a report didn't add up. This one carried the same odor, too neat where it should have been messy, too certain where doubt should live. He flipped through photographs next. Not the public ones, not the carefully staged images with draped flags and soft focus. These were clinical and cold. He studied the left temple, just at the hairline, a thin, half-moon scar shaped like a smile that didn't belong. The nursing notes called it healed laceration. Jack knew better. It wasn't from a windshield or a seat rail. The bevel told a different story. Shrapnel. Small, fast. The kind you only get when something fragments before it hits you. He compared it with a grainy scan of her skull. The pattern was faint, but there, a tiny metallic fleck buried shallow, missed because it sat too cleanly to trip alarms. Crash debris didn't leave signatures like that. A blast did, maybe minor, maybe forgotten, but it was there. He wrote it down in a small spiral notebook he kept in his pocket. He'd labeled the cover a week ago without knowing why. Hope log. It felt silly then. It didn't now. He listed what he'd seen, eyelid flutter on cue with auditory stimulus. Pulse rise at second refrain, lip movement at cadence break. Scar consistent with fragment injury, not primary impact. He paused, pen hovering over paper, as a memory arrived uninvited. A hot room in Kandahar, a boy with dust in his lungs, and a 1,000-yard stare. The medic who trained Jack had whispered, "Sometimes the body stops speaking the language we expect. Doesn't mean it isn't talking." They'd watched for patterns, breath sinking to a hum, a finger twitching to a beat tapped against a cot frame. They called it superstition until it kept a kid alive long enough to wake. He wrote another line in the notebook, brainstem harmonic resonance. The phrase wasn't common, more a field term than a textbook one. But he'd seen it. The way a damaged brainstem sometimes latched to rhythm when it let go of everything else. Not a miracle, not magic. Just a sliver of biology finding a handhold. He put the file away and walked out into the brighter light of the admin hallway. Sarah Blake was waiting there with a paper cup of coffee and a look that said she'd been worrying in silence. "How deep are you going?" she asked. "As deep as it takes," he said. She glanced at the notebook. "Jack, listen to me. If you're wrong, they'll destroy your career." Not just a suspension. They'll make sure you never set foot in a federal facility again. He looked at the cup she offered and didn't take it. If I'm right, I'll save a soldier. She held his eyes, then nodded once. Then keep it tight. No heroics. Notes. Times. Names. They found an empty family room near the ICU, sofas too soft, a box of tissues on the table, a television that only played weather and headlines. Jack set the notebook down and drew the lines he remembered from the monitor, marking small rises where the music had climbed, small dips where the melody rested. He wasn't proving anything. He was listening on paper. A door opened. A woman stepped in with the quiet authority of someone who had learned not to waste volume. White hair pulled back. Glasses on a thin chain. A cardigan instead of a coat. Dr. Helen Ward. Retired neurosurgeon. Former ethics board chair. The kind of person the hospital forgot to fear until she spoke. I hear we have a janitor making neurologists nervous, she said gently. Sarah stood. Dr. Ward, Helen lifted a hand. I'm not here to scold. I'm here to see. She turned to Jack. May I? Jack slid the phone across the table and pressed play. The music box's thin song filled the quiet room. He watched Helen's face instead of the screen. The way her eyes flicked to the monitor, then back, the way her lips pressed together at the exact moment the eyelid drummed. She leaned closer, rewound, watched again. On the third pass, she whispered, almost to herself. That's not random. That's conscious reaction. Sarah exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. Jack swallowed. Then I'm not crazy. Helen didn't smile. Crazy gets the details wrong. You didn't? She tapped the edge of the phone. Show me where you stood. Show me what you did. They returned to room 407. Helen stood beside Jack at the glass, hands folded. He wound the box only once, letting the first bars carry into the silence. Carter lay as still as stone. Then the small things began to move. Barely there, but there. A rise. A rise. A flutter. A sound trying to shape itself around a note. Helen nodded once. Again. He played the melody in halves, then in quarters, letting gaps live where a brain could grab. The rhythm mattered. He could feel it. It wasn't the tune alone. It was timing, the predictable promise that a note would arrive when it should. Stop, Helen said softly. Jack set the box down. Don't speak, she added. He didn't. They stood in the pause together, 3 people and a woman in a bed. Through the glass, Carter's left hand lay against linen, fingers relaxed. Then a slow change traveled through tendon to nail. Tap. Then a breath. Tap. A longer pause. Tap, tap. Helen's head tilted. Do you hear that? Jack did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even regular. But it had intention, the way a whispered prayer has grammar. Morse? Sarah asked, voice barely audible. Jack's eyes stung. He counted the gaps under his breath. 2 short, 1 long. 4 short, 1 long. He fought the urge to name it out loud. He didn't want to scare the thing back into hiding. Helen drew a pen from her cardigan and used the margin of a folded schedule. Slow it down, she murmured. Don't chase it. Let it come to you. They waited, hands still, mouths closed. The ventilator whispered. The monitors kept their metronomes. Carter's fingers rested, then found the sheet again. Short. 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 Long. Space. Short. Long. Space. Short. 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 Helen wrote the marks and leaned back. Then she whispered the letters to herself. H-O-M-E. No one spoke. The word lived by itself in the thin light. Jack pressed fingertips to the glass as if he could warm it through. The line of his jaw trembled once and steadied. He wasn't crying. Not the way most people mean it. The release came from the center of him, a loosening of a knot he'd kept tied since the desert. She's still in there, he said, voice so low it almost didn't pass his lips. She's trying to get back. Ellen folded the paper and slid it into her pocket like evidence. "This doesn't make a miracle," she said. "It makes a responsibility. We'll need controlled trials, independent observers. And Dr. Avery will fight it with everything he has." "I know," Jack said. "Can you reproduce it at will?" she asked. "No," Jack answered honestly. "I can only invite it." "That's the right answer," Ellen said, "because that's what this is." Invitation. Back in the family room, Jack updated the Hope log. He wrote the time down to the minute. He drew a small grid and mapped the taps against the measures of the melody. He noted the length of the pauses and the sequence where the response grew stronger. He didn't try to explain what he couldn't. He let the facts breathe. Sarah paced once and stopped. "If we take this upstairs, he'll call it suggestibility. He'll say you primed her, or that you influenced it with vibration." "Then we remove me," Jack said. "Different hands play the music, different room conditions. Whatever they need." "That's risky," she warned. "If they run it poorly, they'll kill the signal and laugh you out of the building." He looked at the notebook again, thumb resting on the words he'd written, brainstem harmonic resonance. The phrase sounded fragile in a world that preferred scalpel terms and numbers, but he trusted what it meant. A damaged brain could still hear rhythm. A wounded mind could still reach for familiar anchors. "You are my sunshine" wasn't a cure. It was a rope. "Either way," he said, "we go forward." Helen stood by the door, watching them without blinking. "I'll convene the right people," she said, "not a crowd. Just enough eyes to make this honest. If there's life, we'll let it speak. If there isn't, we stop." Jack nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He walked alone after that, letting the corridors move past him. He paused at a window where the morning tried to break through cloud and didn't. He thought about home, about what that word had meant to him in dusty tents and long plane rides and empty apartments. It had never been a place. It had always been a person, or a sound, or a promise that someone would be there when he returned. He returned to room 407 once more before his shift ended. He didn't play the music. He didn't speak. He stood with his hand near the glass and let the machines keep their rhythm. Then, as if to remind him that faith doesn't only live in noise, the tiniest movement returned. Not a tap this time, but a slow curl against linen. A resting hand finding its own shape. "I hear you," he whispered, "and I won't stop." In the notebook, he added one last line before closing it. "Pattern suggests intent. Proceed with care." Then he put the book in his pocket and walked toward the place where duty and doubt would meet, not with certainty, but with enough courage to keep listening. They didn't announce the meeting. They didn't post it on a board. A plain email landed in Sarah Blake's inbox at 11:42, stamped with a red banner that said, "Immediate." The subject line read, "Special Proceedings, Conference C, no CCs." No traceable chain. The kind of message that disappears if you stare at it too long. She found Jack in a quiet alcove near the stairwell, the music box cupped in his hands like a small, stubborn truth. "They're calling it now," she said. No time for anything else. He nodded once. "Let's go." Conference C sat behind a double door with frosted glass and a brass handle polished by 30 years of nervous palms. Inside, a long table split the room like a runway. On one side sat 3 doctors in white coats and 2 in suits. On the other side, 2 colonels, a major with a legal pad, and a hospital administrator whose smile looked printed and then taped on. At the head, a captain with a recorder and a gavel that wasn't a gavel, just a heavy pen she could rap on the table if she needed attention. Dr. Thomas Avery occupied the chair closest to the head, hands folded, chin lifted half an inch, eyes flat and bright. He didn't look at Jack. He looked through him. The captain cleared her throat. "This is a closed session. No recordings beyond the official transcript. Attendees will identify themselves for the record." One by one, they did. Titles rolled past like checkpoints. Chief Neurologist, Attending, Counsel, Ethics Liaison, Colonel, Administrator. Sarah gave her name simply, with Military Attorney after it. Jack said, "Jack Monroe," as if the rest of him didn't belong here at all. Mr. Monroe, the captain began, you are here under allegation of interference with a classified medical protocol and potential breach of restricted ICU procedures. Do you understand? I do, he said. Do you have counsel? Sarah lifted a hand. I'm present as advisor. Doctor. Avery leaned forward, voice smooth. Before we waste any time, Mr. Stein, Mr. C's. Monroe is a janitor. He has no clinical responsibilities. He has inserted himself into a case certified by 22 doctors as brain death. This isn't a war zone, a war zone, Mr. Few. Monroe, your combat instincts mean nothing here. Jack didn't flinch. He looked down the table from face to face, coats, collars, polished rank, and said, quiet as a heartbeat, then maybe that's the problem. You stopped listening for life. A few chairs shifted. The captain tapped the heavy pen once and turned to Sarah. Ms. Blake, you requested this session. Proceed. Sarah kept her voice even. We're submitting video evidence showing repeatable vital response patterns in General Evelyn Carter coincident with auditory stimulus, eye movement synchronization with specific measures of music, pulse variability at refrain intervals. We have timestamps, logs, and a third-party observer. A doctor in a gray suit snorted. A toy box and wishful thinking. Sarah didn't look at him. Doctor. Ellen Ward is here. The room changed temperature a degree. Dr. Caro. Ward entered without fanfare, cardigan buttoned, reading glasses on a chain. She took the lone empty chair and folded her hands. Dr. Ward, the captain said, you're present as? Retired neurosurgeon. Former chair of this hospital's ethics board. Her tone was almost kind, and someone who still recognizes a conscious reaction when she sees one. Avery's jaw ticked. With respect, Dr. Ward, retirement can romanticize memory. With respect, Dr. Avery, she replied, arrogance can cauterize judgment. Sarah slid a tablet onto the table and pressed play. The room filled with the thin, stubborn notes of, You Are My Sunshine. On the screen, Carter's face, the monitor, the small movement of an eyelid at the same beat again on the second run. The pulse climbed, not wildly, but in a way that meant something. The gray suit doctor rolled a pen between his fingers. Artifacts, noise in the line. Sarah cued a second clip. Slower tempo. The eyelid lifted longer. Lips pressed toward shape. A finger curled a hair's breadth. A colonel leaned forward despite himself. Run it again. They watched all 3 clips. No cinematic music. No slow-motion tricks. Just the stubborn math of cause and effect written on skin and scream. The captain looked to Avery. Doctor, he forced a smile. Cute. But we cannot allow sentimentality to replace science. If the board permits, we'll do a controlled test to put this to bed. And then Mr. Monroe can return to polishing floors. Sarah said, run the test. Doctor. Ward's eyes found Jack's. Same conditions? She asked. Same as we can, he said. But I don't want to be the variable. If someone else plays it. No, Ward said gently. If the invitation came from your hands, let it come from your hands again. Science isn't only sterile, it's honest. We name the variables we can't remove. They moved as a group down the hall, past the ICU desk, where nurses pretended not to notice and failed. Conference C's door shut, and the corridor opened on room 407 like a stage. The glass caught reflections, white coats, uniforms, a janitor who once pinned tourniquets with his teeth. Inside, Carter lay still, machines tracing the boundary between sound and silence. The captain spoke for the record. Supervised auditory stimulus test. Observers present. No physical manipulation of the patient. Begin. Jack stepped to the bedside. He felt everyone behind him like weather. He didn't look back. He set the music box on the tray, wound it once, and lifted the lid. The melody rose into the sterile air, off-key in places where a child had loved it too hard. The ventilator kept its metronome. The monitors held their green lines. For a moment, nothing else moved. Then something did. A small rise, a breath not dictated by machine. An eyelid climbed half a beat after the note, then fell. A soft tightening at the corner of a mouth, a suggestion of voice remembering shape. Avery said, pen tapping. Coincidence. Again, Dr. Ward murmured. Jack wound the spring halfway. The tune shivered and slowed, stuttered the way Lily liked when sleep found her. He watched the monitor. The pulse nudged up 3 ticks. Down 1. Up 2. He counted in his head, 1 and 2, and there. The left hand moved. Not a twitch, a search. He stepped closer, not touching, not breathing. He let the next measure arrive like a promise kept. Her fingers lifted a fraction and fell, then lifted again. On the 3rd lift, they found him. Skin met skin at his wrist, cool, dry, unmistakably human. It wasn't a grasp like a man in a storm clamps rope. It was more fragile, a remembering of how to hold. Gasps broke around the bed like a wave hitting rock. The younger neurologist swore softly. The older one stopped writing. Avery stumbled a step backward into the footboard, the sound small but loud in the room. The monitor, so steady moments before, tripped its own wire. A flat tone cut across everything, that bright, merciless line. The room contracted. A nurse reached instinctively for the code button and froze when the green stuttered, trembled, then returned to rhythm. Flatline dissolved back into heartbeat. The tone fell silent. A murmur shivered through the crowd. The captain's pen hovered above the paper. For the record. Record this, Sarah whispered. Jack didn't speak. He didn't move his arm. The small hand at his wrist trembled and squeezed again, once, as if to say, wait. His throat went tight. Somewhere past the noise of fear and proof, he heard her mouth find air. It was only a breath at first, shaped by muscle that had forgotten the road to meaning. Then the shape became a syllable, paper thin, but real, son. It broke. He didn't push. He let the next measure do the work and felt the squeeze again, weaker this time, but there. The sound came back, a little clearer, a little braver. Chime. No one moved. The room was a church. Dr. Wace, Dr. Bilia. Ward was the first to breathe. She didn't cry. She nodded, once, as if to herself, as if checking a box she'd been holding in her pocket. That will be enough. Avery tried to find his footing in authority. Random phonation, he said, but his voice wouldn't harden. Air through the cords. The laryngeal. The older neurologist cut him off. Doctor, stop. Sarah turned to the captain. You have your result. The captain's face had changed. The edges softened. She looked younger and older all at once. We'll adjourn, she said. Ms. Blake, submit your written report. Dr. Ward, I'll need your statement. She glanced at Jack and then, carefully, at the bed. And whatever happens next, we proceed with care. They filed out in 1s and 2s. No one spoke loudly. The corridor swallowed them, and what started as a secret could not stay one. News leaks don't travel. They erupt. An orderly with a cousin in comms. A resident who texted a single sentence he'll swear later he never sent. A nurse who posted 3 words on a private page. She said, sunshine. Within an hour, a hashtag lit up like a flare in desert wind. Wake up Evelyn. A second one followed, hungry and proud, the janitor who believed. By dusk, 1,000 comments pressed against the hospital's digital doors. By midnight, there were 50,000. Profiles with unit patches and folded flag icons. Grandfathers who typed with 2 fingers. Kids who watched homecoming videos like movies. We see you. We're with you. Don't let them shut this down. A grainy still from the test. Carter's hand at Jack's wrist slipped into the wild. It wasn't high resolution. It didn't have to be. The image carried everything the numbers could not. A human hand remembering another human hand. Veterans groups grabbed it like an old guidon and ran. Parachute associations. Navy wives. A Marine with a prosthetic who wrote, "Sometimes it isn't the surgeon who brings you back. Sometimes it's the guy mopping your blood who refuses to look away." The Post found 1,000,000 eyes before breakfast. Inside the hospital, command scrambled to hold the walls. The administrator drafted statements that said nothing in 100 words. The colonels called other colonels. The legal major called someone at the Pentagon who never sleeps. At 2 in the morning, a directive landed. Initiate formal review of all non-responsive cases with reported auditory responsiveness. Prioritize documentation. Report findings. It didn't say why. It didn't say who asked. The email signature was a title without a name. Jack didn't see the email. He was in the ICU waiting room, sitting with elbows on knees, music box on the table in front of him like a campfire. Sarah slept upright in a chair, blazer draped over her like a flag. Doctor. Ward wrote notes in a precise hand that didn't smudge. Around them, the night moved on tiptoe. Frank Miller found Jack at dawn with 2 coffees and eyes that had watched one war too many on television. He set the cup down. "I told you they'd try to hang this on you," he said softly, "but I think they just lost their hook." Jack didn't smile. "It's not about them losing. It's about her winning." Frank nodded. "Maybe for once, it can be both." By midday, the hospital's front lawn hosted cameras and microphones blooming on metal stalks. No one official spoke. No one needed to. The story had outrun press releases. A soldier long respected declared gone. A janitor who used to be a medic. A lullaby older than heartbreak. A word the whole country knew how to finish. The Pentagon didn't hold a press conference. It issued a memo with teeth. Every military medical center will re-evaluate flagged cases. Auditory stimulus trials will be standardized and logged. Independent observers will be present. Findings will be reviewed by Central Command Ethics within 30 days. No exceptions. In rooms that hadn't felt a visitor in months, music began. Not the same song. Not always. A daughter's voicemail played on loop. A husband's laugh recorded by accident. A psalm. The whistle of a train. Nurses who had no time found time. Medics who had left the field brought it back in the curl of a knuckle-tapping rhythm on the bedrail. At Port Haven, staff who had laughed at Jack 2 days before now held doors for him. Not because he was important, because he had made them remember what they were for. Dr. Avery retreated to the fortress of paperwork and precedents. He signed forms and rescinded comments and blamed process. He insisted on language that dulled edges, auditory coincidence, inconclusive association. But even his own pen had begun to shake at the edges, a tremor he blamed on fatigue and never named as fear. Sarah fielded calls she didn't want from people who liked to own success after it happened. "We always supported this. We were just waiting for the right moment." She said thank you when she had to, and nothing at all when she could. Then she went back to the place where gratitude wasn't useful. Dr. Ward wrote her statement in a language that could stand in court and still hold the truth. Observed repeatable response to auditory stimulus in patient previously declared brain dead. Recommendation: suspend irreversible procedures pending further controlled trials. She underlined suspend once, then put down her pen. Jack spent his breaks at the glass, not playing the music unless he was allowed, not pressing the moment to be bigger than it could be. He whispered a promise that no one heard, "I'm here." Sometimes her fingers twitched, sometimes they didn't. He learned not to measure love in an inch of movement. When he finally stepped outside for air, the evening had gone soft. The noise on the lawn was not angry. It was expectant, the way a crowd grows quiet before the first note of the anthem. A retired sergeant in a wheelchair raised 2 fingers at him in a wordless salute. A girl on her father's shoulders waved a paper sun she'd colored with a crayon so hard it nearly tore. Jack paused on the steps and felt the strange weight of being seen. He hadn't asked for it. He didn't want it. He wanted the small hidden wins, the eyelid, the breath, the hand. But he understood something old then, something the field had taught him under a sky stripped of mercy. Sometimes one pulse belongs to all of us. He went back in. The test had given Carter's silence a voice. Now, the work would be to let that voice get stronger without letting the roar outside drown it. He understood that too. A medic's first rule, do no harm, even with hope. In the quiet stretch after midnight, he sat alone with the hope log open on his knee and wrote without hurry. Controlled test observed. Hand grasped wrist at measure 3. Flatline, then return to rhythm. Word formed, sunshine. He added one more sentence, a thing no judge could accept as evidence, but that told the exact truth. When the country finished the word for her, she heard it. The weeks that followed blurred into slow motion, a steady rhythm of beeps, tests, and quiet astonishment. General Evelyn Carter no longer lived behind glass and machinery. Her eyes opened and stayed open, tracking light and shadow, learning again the discipline of being awake. On the morning the staff first heard her voice, it was a whisper aimed at the nurse adjusting her IV. "Where's the man who sang to me?" The nurse froze, then smiled through tears. "He's still here, ma'am." "We'll find him." Word spread fast. By the time Sarah Blake reached the ward, she already knew what she would tell Jack Monroe. "Pentagon's sending auditors," she said, catching him by the vending machines. "Ethics Oversight Division. Colonel Laura Briggs herself. They're coming to make sure this doesn't turn into legend." Jack nodded. "Let them come. She's talking." Briggs arrived the next morning in pressed fatigues and a voice that didn't waste syllables. She called Jack into a side office and closed the door. "You understand the gravity of what you did, Mr. Stand." "Monroe? Unauthorized contact. Breach of restricted zone. Chain of command nightmares." He stood at parade rest without thinking. "Yes, ma'am?" She studied him for a long time. "Then why risk everything?" Jack's answer came quiet but sure. "Because someone once did the same for me when I was down. Pulled me out of a convoy wreck no one thought I'd survive." "You learn not to walk past a heartbeat." Briggs exhaled through her nose. Not approval, not dismissal, something in between. "That's all for now." When he turned to leave, she added, softer, "For what it's worth, the generals upstairs are paying attention." Carter's recovery accelerated like a tide finally allowed to rise. First, her eyes followed movement, then her fingers. Then came the words. Clipped, deliberate, stubborn. Within weeks she sat upright, feeding herself, reciting rank and serial numbers as if to remind the world who she was. When they told her about the janitor who refused to let her go, she smiled faintly. "Then he did what soldiers do," she said. He stood his post. The hearing that followed was public, televised from a small Pentagon auditorium packed with uniforms, journalists, and the smell of too much coffee. It was meant to be procedural, a confirmation that the system still worked. No one expected what happened next. Midway through Dr. Avery's testimony, the rear doors opened, the room fell silent. General Evelyn Carter entered on her own 2 feet, dress blues impeccable, medals muted under the lights. The cane in her right hand was regulation black. The determination in her face was pure command. Avery's voice cracked. "General Carter, you shouldn't." She stopped in front of the table, eyes level with his. "Doctor, you declared me gone." She turned slightly, finding Jack in the crowd. He saw me breathing. No one dared move. The camera shutters clicked like rain. She stepped closer to the panel, spine straight despite the tremor in her hands. Mr. Monroe did not disobey orders. He followed duty, the oldest kind, the one that listens when the world says, "Be quiet." Then she did what no one expected. She raised her hand and gave the crisp, perfect salute of a 4-star general to a man in janitor blues. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but the sound of that motion, fabric shifting, heels clicking. Jack's throat closed. He returned the salute slowly, eyes wet but steady. The silence that followed lasted a full minute, heavy, sacred, unforgettable. Even Avery bowed his head. Outside, when the footage aired, millions watched in stunned stillness. The salute became a symbol on every veteran's page, every hospital bulletin board. For once, the story wasn't about protocol or miracle. It was about a soldier who refused to stop listening and a nation that finally remembered how. The official letter arrived in a plain envelope, no crest, no pomp, just a block of text that ended 3 battles with a single sentence. All allegations are dismissed, Mr. Smith. Jack Monroe is cleared of wrongdoing and commended for extraordinary presence of mind. Jack read it twice at the kitchen table, the music box resting beside his coffee like a small witness. He didn't celebrate. He folded the letter along its crease and slipped it behind the photograph of Lily at the fall festival, face paint smudged, sun in her hair. 2 days later, he stood backstage at the Pentagon Auditorium, palms dry, back straight out of habit, not ceremony. The murmur of a full house pushed like soft wind against the curtain. He could hear dress shoes on polished floor, the low rumble of quiet conversation, the occasional click of a camera lens finding focus. He fixed the collar of the only jacket he owned and made a mental note to re-glue the loose wheel on his cart when this was over. Ordinary thoughts steadied him. "Ready?" Sarah Blake asked, appearing at his elbow. Her voice was like the first sip of water after a long march, simple, necessary. "As I'll ever be," he said. "You're not here by accident, Jack." She squeezed his forearm. "Remember that." General Evelyn Carter stood a few paces away, dress blue sharp, cane in her right hand, pride in every line of her posture. She had a softness at the edges now, the kind that comes after you've met the bottom and come back up. When she caught Jack watching, her mouth tugged into a small smile. "They tell me you don't like stages," she said. "They make my hands itch," he admitted. "Good," she replied. "Means you remember what matters off of them." The announcer's voice rolled from the speakers, crisp and ceremonial. "Please stand for the entrance of the official party." The room rose. The curtains parted. Light flooded the wings, bright and clean, and the 3 of them stepped into it. The stage was simple, a lectern with the seal, 2 flags, a row of chairs. Nothing dramatic, nothing to distract from the truth. Jack took his place where they told him, 1 step back and to the side. General Carter moved to the lectern, nodded to the audience, and let the room settle into silence. "Good afternoon," she began. "We are gathered in recognition of something we don't name enough, duty without orders." She let the phrase live in the air. In uniformed rows were colonels and captains, hospital administrators, nurses in dress whites, veterans with medals that caught the spotlights and threw them back like constellations. "In a time when procedure protects us," she continued, "we are here because a man remembered what procedure is meant to protect." She turned from the microphone and faced him fully. "Mr. Full." Jack Monroe, front and center. Jack's legs moved before his doubt could argue. He stepped to the line marked on the floor with tape so thin only a stagehand would notice. He stood at parade rest without thinking, then corrected himself, hands at his sides, a civilian made careful by years of training. General Carter's aide approached with a small blue box. Carter took it and opened the lid. Inside lay a medal he'd never seen before, modest, unassuming, a coin of matte metal on a ribbon the color of morning sky. The inscription caught the light when she tilted it. "For service without orders." "For saving my life," she said, voice steady but warm. "For forcing the rest of us to keep listening. For reminding a nation that rank does not own courage." She stepped close, the cane planted firm, and pinned the ribbon above the left pocket of his jacket with a precision that came from decades of ceremonies. The metal was cool, the weight felt honest. "For service without orders," she repeated, this time less for the audience and more for him. The aide stepped back. The room didn't clap yet. It breathed. Carter held his eyes, the smallest crack of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Guess you were right," she said, "just for him. I wasn't gone yet." His throat tightened. He leaned to the mic on its stand, not to speak to the hall, but to trust the sound system with a whisper meant for one person and somehow for all of them. "You are my sunshine." A ripple moved through the crowd, not amusement, not sentimentality, recognition. The story had carried further than any of them imagined. Soldiers in the back row blinked hard. A nurse covered her mouth with 2 fingers. A camera clicked and then remembered to be quiet. The applause started like rain on a roof. A few palms, then a few more, and then became a storm that filled the space from floor to rafters. It wasn't the wild cheer of a sports arena. It was a standing, respectful thunder. Officers rose first, then enlisted, then civilians, then the press, the wave traveling outward until the whole hall stood. Hands came to brows in salute. Others pressed palms together and held them near their hearts. For one long minute, it wasn't about a janitor or a general. It was about a promise kept. At the edge of the stage, Dr. Thomas Avery sat in the front row, suit immaculate, posture still. He didn't look up at first. Then he did, and the weight of the moment bent his head. Shame doesn't show well on camera. It shows in small things, a jaw unclenching, a pen set down like a white flag. He lowered his gaze and kept it there while the applause rolled over him and moved on. When the room finally found quiet, Sarah leaned close enough for only him to hear. "Told you the truth always finds its voice." He didn't trust himself to answer. He let the line land and stay. A retired master sergeant took the stage next and told a brief story about a medic in Helmand who refused to leave a wounded corporal in a wadi during a dust storm. Nobody needed to know that the medic was Jack. The details were sanded down, the names tucked away. The point stood without them. Sometimes the bravest thing you do is wait with someone who might not make it. As speakers came and went, Jack studied the audience. He recognized the faces by type. The lieutenant colonel counting minutes. The young captain pretending not to be moved. The nurse who had seen so much she had learned to cry without smudging her makeup. The veteran in the second row whose sleeve hung empty and who stood straighter than everyone when the anthem played. Backstage, phones lit up with messages traveling faster than ceremony. The live-stream chat scrolled like a river, salute from Fayetteville. Watching from Manchester, God bless you, mate. Marine mom here, bawling my eyes out. From a janitor to a janitor, proud of you. Salute to the janitor who never stopped believing. Comments layered over comments until the moderator stopped trying to pin the good ones and let the flood be its own tribute. Frank Miller, who had slipped into a seat near the aisle without ceremony or invitation, waited until the crowd thinned. He ambled forward with the careful gait of a man whose knees had recently learned to complain. When he reached Jack, he didn't offer a handshake. He pulled him into a one-armed hug that smelled like old coffee and floor wax. "You just made every medic proud, son," Frank said, voice rough. "Everyone who ever waited for a breath and prayed they weren't hearing ghosts." Jack laughed once, a short, unsteady sound, and squeezed back. "It wasn't me alone. It never is," Frank said. "That's what makes it good." General Carter wasn't done. She returned to the lectern and looked out over the crowd until it hushed on instinct. "Honors are strange things," she said. "We pretend they belong to the person who wears them. They don't. They belong to the standard they represent." She gestured toward Jack without turning. "Today is not a story about a janitor who got lucky. It is a story about a soldier who recognized a signal through the noise because he refuses to forget what the rest of us sometimes do." She let that hang, then added, "Protocol is our backbone. Humanity is our heartbeat. We fall apart without both." She stepped aside. The band near the back, just a trio of uniformed musicians with a snare, a horn, and a clarinet, played a soft interlude that wasn't quite a hymn. It threaded through the room, giving people a way to breathe. A young airman approached shyly, hat under his arm. "Sir," he said to Jack, awkward with respect, "my sister's been in a coma since March. After what happened here, they tried music. She squeezed my hand yesterday. I just wanted to say, thank you." Jack didn't know what to do with gratitude that pure. He shook the airman's hand and nodded once. "Hold on to that," he said. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it. Near the aisle, Dr. Simber." Avery rose. For a moment, Jack thought he might leave quietly, slip past the moment and out into a hallway where reputations can be repaired with the right words. Instead, Avery approached the stage stairs and stopped at the foot, eyes on the floor, hands empty. "Mister?" "Monroe," he said, voice stripped of polish, "I was wrong." He swallowed. The microphone didn't catch it, but Jack saw the effort. "I forgot what listening sounds like. I'm sorry." Jack could have let him hang there. He could have nodded and turned away. Instead, he stepped down the first stair and reached out his hand. Avery stared at it like a lifeline thrown into deep water. "Then I'll hold you to being right next time," Jack said. Avery took the hand. It wasn't absolution. It was a beginning. Outside the auditorium, the world continued in its noisy way, traffic and emails and 100 small urgencies. Inside, the ceremony concluded with less spectacle than it deserved and exactly the restraint it needed. People filtered out smiling in that quiet, stunned way reserved for weddings, funerals, and victories that keep you humble. On stage, after the last photo and the last handshake, Jack found a corner away from cameras and took the music box from his pocket. He didn't open it. He just held it for a moment, thumb on the dent near the hinge, and listened to a sound that wasn't there, the memory of a tune that had become more than a song. General Carter joined him, her steps even despite the cane. "You know," she said, "I used to think the bravest thing I ever did was sign the order to fly into a sandstorm." "And now?" he asked. "Ask for help," she said. "Turns out, I'm not terrible at it," he smiled. "You're getting the hang of it." She tipped her head toward the ribbon resting on his chest. "That looks good on you." "It looks heavy," he said. "It should," she replied. "Wear it anyway." They stood there a moment, two silhouettes amid folding chairs and coiled cables. Sarah reappeared with a phone full of missed calls and a look that mixed exhaustion with relief. "They're already asking if you'll do interviews," she said. "No," Jack answered. Carter chuckled. "He's learning. Let the story be the story," Sarah said. "That's enough." Jack nodded. He turned toward the stage one last time and scanned the empty seats as if to memorize their arrangement. He didn't know why. Maybe because somewhere in the pattern of it all, the rows, the aisles, the path from backstage to light, he felt a map of the last months written in simple lines. From doubt to proof, from silence to song, from one hand on a wrist to a nation standing. When they finally stepped into the corridor, Frank fell in beside him, Sarah on the other side, General Carter leading them through the last door. The hallway smelled like fresh paint and old air conditioning. It was, despite everything, just a hallway. Jack liked that. It meant they still had to walk, one foot then the other, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the comments kept rolling in, a chorus made of 1,000 small voices. Salute to the janitor who never stopped believing. From Glasgow, with respect. From Tulsa, with tears. From a nurse in Ohio, you reminded me why I started. Jack didn't read them then. He would later, maybe, when the apartment was quiet and Lily was asleep and the medal lay on the counter beside the music box. For now, he tucked the ribbon's weight into his awareness, the way a medic fits new gear into old habit, not as ornament, but as responsibility. "You hungry?" Frank asked, breaking the spell as doors swung shut and lights dimmed behind them. "Starving," Jack said. "Good," Frank replied. "There's a diner down the road that still puts real butter on the pancakes." Sarah leaned in as they walked. "We did it," she whispered. "Told you, the truth always finds its voice." Jack touched the metal without looking and found the edges with his fingers. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we just finally got quiet enough to hear it." 1 year later, the air around Port Haven felt lighter, as if the building itself had decided to breathe again. The parking lot was full of families in Sunday clothes, veterans in uniform, and hospital staff who hadn't worn their badges today because this wasn't about work. It was about healing. The banner above the new wing read, "The Sunrise Room, a place for recovery and renewal." Inside, the walls were lined with photographs, faces once pale and still, now bright, alive, laughing. Each frame carried a story. A nurse pointed to one and whispered, "He was gone 3 months." A medic answered, "Not anymore." General Evelyn Carter stood at the podium, a microphone clipped to her uniform, the faint glint of her cane catching the sunlight that spilled through the skylight. Her voice filled the hall, steady, calm, commanding. The highest form of honor, she said, is letting someone see you broken and trusting them to stay. People nodded, a few wiped tears. Behind her, a string of small flags framed the stage, one for every branch of service. She turned slightly, motioning to Jack Monroe, who stood near the front row with Lily beside him, her hands folded nervously in her lap. The little girl's hair had grown longer since that first night. The same music box, freshly polished, rested beside the piano bench waiting for her cue. Today, Carter continued, we open this room not just for the wounded, but for their families, the ones who hold the line when the rest of us can't. And we dedicate it to a man who taught us all that duty doesn't need an order to matter. She reached into her pocket and drew out a challenge coin, polished silver with deep blue enamel. The engraving caught the light. 4. Service without orders. Jack Monroe, 2026. When she handed it to him, Jack hesitated. He wasn't sure whether to salute or shake her hand. Carter solved it by pulling him into a brief, firm embrace. Take it, she whispered. You earned it the hard way. The crowd applauded softly. Not the sharp military kind, but a human one, warm and unhurried. Jack's eyes glossed over. He turned the coin between his fingers and saw his own reflection bend across the metal. Lily moved to the piano. The first hesitant notes of "You Are My Sunshine" floated through the room, wobbly but clear. A few veterans hummed along, then more, until the melody swelled into something larger than the small, upright piano could contain. Voices joined from the back, gravelly, off-key, sincere. Jack looked around. Everywhere he saw motion, a sergeant's hand on his wife's shoulder, a nurse wiping her eyes, an old Marine closing his one good fist in time with the music. He realized this song no longer belonged to him and Lily alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever waited beside a bed and refused to stop believing. I wasn't trying to be a hero, he said softly when the applause faded. I just couldn't stop listening. Carter smiled. Then may the rest of us keep learning from that. They unveiled the final plaque on the far wall. The letters were simple, carved deep into brass, sometimes the quietest voices. No one spoke for a long time. They just looked at it, the sunlight spilling across the words, the faint echo of the piano still trembling in the air. Outside, the flags fluttered in a slow breeze, the kind that feels like memory made visible. Jack slipped the coin into his pocket, feeling its solid weight against the fabric. Lily tugged his sleeve. Dad, she whispered, do you think she hears it when we play? He knelt beside her and smiled. Yeah, sweetheart, I think she always will. They stood together, watching the crowd filter through the doors, their faces touched by that golden light only morning or rebirth can bring. The world hadn't changed overnight, but maybe it had started to listen. Courage isn't rank, medals, or uniform. Sometimes, it's just hearing what the world refuses to listen to and answering back with faith strong enough to be heard. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a hero, just a man who refused to stop believing. When everyone else walked away, he stayed, armed with nothing but faith, a song, and the courage to listen when the world called it hopeless. And because of one janitor's song, a general came home, and thousands of others found hope again. So the next time you hear silence, remember, it might be someone trying to find their way back. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive, for those who served, for those who waited, and for generations yet to come.